Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for staying for the last session of the day. I'm sure there's a drink that you're attracted to after this. So anyway, I was going to talk to you about what we see the vision of come 2070, which is obviously quite a long time in the future. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the challenges that we see facing us both currently and within that time, and look at the evolution of the technology and potentially with some examples of how we'll get there. So current challenges. This is one obviously that the media have grabbed hold of at the moment. Air quality you don't seem to be able to escape it at the moment. So it's estimated globally that around 1 in 10 people die. 1 in 10 people's death is due to air pollution and poor air pollution, with projected global car count currently around 1.2 billion and expected to double by 2030. We really need to address this because transport is currently responsible for about 25% of the greenhouse emissions. So looking at how we can improve this and decrease these emissions is one of the key challenges that we currently face and engineers face. The second one is that of congestion. So this is obviously not in the UK, but it's something that we need to, again, think of. So currently we're expected, or the OECD expect, that there'll be around 9.5 billion people living in the world by around 2070. So, that's a huge amount of people in terms of transporting them around, giving them food to eat, making sure they've got the right energy, and that's all problems that engineers have to face. Currently within the UK, around 8 out of 10 people live in cities, and our cities are responsible for about 20% of our emissions, 70% of our emissions. But also, what's interesting, as you go forward to 2070, if we don't address the challenges such as pollution and climate change, 90% of our cities are under threat from flooding, which is quite interesting, and so maybe we shouldn't all be moving to our cities, but maybe that's another question. So how we've changed and how we're evolving. This is a slide of the current generations, if you like. So we start on the left-hand side with those born pre-1945, and slowly to the right we move to those born after 1995. So we're seeing the baby boomers retiring, and we're essentially seeing those of us, or myself, who have been brought up with digital technology. And then I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she is what is termed as digitally native. In fact, she's actually started teaching me a few things on how to use my iPad and things that I didn't realise, which is really scary. So, and I class myself as quite tech savvy. So it's definitely something that we have to think of. But also, one of the things about this is that you have to think about who is designing the products and the services that we currently use. And it's predominantly people aged between sort of 25 to 50. So are they a good representation of society? And actually, if you look at them, the answer is no, because actually they're predominantly male, and they're predominantly engineers who don't typically, and I can say this as an engineer, don't engage very well with society, making sure that we're fulfilling the needs. But also, we're not very good at assessing, is accessibility right? Are these the right products that people need? So these are all questions that we need to raise. So when I was thinking about how do you represent society really, I came up with this. So after a few glasses of wine, I hasten to add. So I think this is quite a fair representation of the society that we live in, with the Tin Woodman representing, if only I had a heart, so representing the growth in automation and robotics that we're seeing. This is something that people are very aware of, in some ways scared. Next, I'll move to the Scarecrow, so if only I had a brain. So again, this is about making sure that we're taking people along with the technology that we have. A lot of our cars are fitted, and even our phones are fitted with technology that potentially we don't use at all. We might even turn it off. So all the additional functionality that our engineers are designing, we aren't actually using. So again, whilst we say this technology potentially improves safety and reduces emissions, if we're turning it off, we won't be seeing the real benefits from it. Then I'll go to the lion, the cowardly lion. So I actually think that he represents a lot of our leaders in the world, and the fact that they aren't bold enough to make decisions that we need. If you think of anything to do with our infrastructure, it takes a bold decision that don't often get very made, and hence the planning of any of our large infrastructure projects tend to take around 30 years to develop. So trying to change that and actually changing behaviours from businesses needs strong leadership, and that's something that we don't currently see on the market. And then finally, there's Dorothy, No Place Like Home. This, I think, represents some of the latest voting that we've seen around the world, so with the Trump and the Brexit side of things, that people are rejecting the establishment, and actually so they're starting to feel their lack of community and their sense of community. So trying to address how we meet this demand is something that I think we need to look into more deeply. So taking this a step further, rise in automation. So we've already heard a lot about the growth in drones, but for example, industrial robots are seeing a year-on-year growth of around 30%. So that essentially means there's a birth rate is doubling every 5 years. So that's significant growth. So we need to think of how is this going to affect society. Whilst these robots and drones or whatever may be doing certain tasks that we may find remedial, we must look at what skills we need to develop going forward to make sure that we have those right skills and that we aren't leaving people behind and actually driving a further wedge in society. Looking at this, and then to address the skills things, engineers, we're problem solvers. We're going to design the solutions that people want. Yeah, again, you look at the engineering figures, and we've been declining for the last 40 years. We've been on steady decline. So how do we attract people into the profession? I'm sure some of you are familiar with dot to dots. Maybe you remember them from when you were a child or have children yourself. So this represents our transport network. So each dot represents potentially our transport manufacturers, our service providers, our telecommunications side of things, but also each of the modes, so a rail, road, aerospace. And actually, whilst you think you might join some of the dots and have the full picture, have the image, or know what the image is, it's not actually until you join all the dots that you actually have that full image and understand what the real picture is. And we must not forget that actually society is a big part of that, and everybody within this room and everybody that you know needs to start getting involved to make sure that we have the transport network that is both efficient and resilient, and the one that we want in the future. So it's a big challenge that we have going forward. So there's also a big issue about how we reach that audience. We're not very good at reaching out to people and asking people what they want. Particularly as somebody from a tech background, we like designing things that are clever and do things that you wouldn't expect, that solve particular problems. But actually, if people don't know they have those problems or don't know how to use it, as I've said before, they'll often turn it off and not see the real capability of it. So this is how we travel currently. Tickets for everything. Not very efficient, very annoying, and we're not really seeking the value of what we're trying to get from our network. We're using old infrastructure that hasn't been updated, so it's definitely something that we need to refresh. So what will the network look like in the future? Well, hopefully seamless and integrated. But to get that, we need to look at what we want from it, how we want to travel, and what stability. A lot of people still talk about smart ticketing. I don't even know why we're talking about ticketing anymore. To me, it seems a bit crazy. It seems like an old technology. I don't understand why we just can't move from pillar to post, especially with things like contactless now. How can we manage that more effectively? We've heard a lot today about the improvements of data. So again, this is something that knows where we are. So actually, can't we just be charged by our phone, letting them know where we are? So trains, this is. So this is actually today. So this is actually a train in Japan. It's called the Shikishima, and it's a train that's been developed, and it travels across the north of Japan, and it's a luxury train so that you get to a real viewpoint of the outside, and I think it looks great actually, but it's looking at actually using transport and trains as a more luxurious form of getting around the place. And then we move to things like the intelligent car, the intelligent transport system. So this is something that we see time and again, but it's looking at, why can't we start using our business life more efficiently? So having meetings, whether it be on the car on the way to work, so potentially instead of missing rush hour, a congestion and you've got a meeting, instead of going to the office first, can't you pick your colleague up on the way to the meeting and actually go through the presentation on the car? That way maybe you could leave your house a little later, maybe have breakfast with your family for once, or do some emailing and actually go through the presentation there and then in the car on the way to the meeting. Or actually, on a flight, do that. But interestingly, I see the bottom left, you'll see, these are some sketches and some concepts that have been coming out of Boeing. I'm not sure if I was travelling through the air that I'd like to think that I was underwater. It might make me feel a bit strange, and obviously there's challenges with motion sickness and things on that. But again, you see on the bottom right, meetings on trains would be very useful to have those segregated booths. For example, I travelled up this morning. Okay, I wasn't in the quiet coach, but there was a group of tables discussing very loudly some of their business, and I really didn't care about their business. I won't tell you what sector they were in. But if actually they had these booths, they could have private discussions and potentially be more productive. Finally, there's accessibility for all. This is something that we don't really address. I did notice earlier when I was on Twitter that Uber are offering free rides for anybody who requires wheelchair access to vote. So they're starting to think about it. But we're not very good at thinking about the design of our vehicles to be accessible for all. This isn't obviously only an issue with people who have got limited accessibility, but also those who have got visual impairment. And we must not forget that we've got an ageing society. So how do we address that? And again, this is a question that I have a lot of the time with people developing autonomous vehicles. Why aren't we looking at level 5 full autonomy? Because actually the people that really would seek the benefits and the rewards of this technology are those that potentially shouldn't be driving anymore, can't drive, or are too young to drive. And really those ones in the middle, like you and I, who do drive, we might not use the technology, we might turn it off. So is that technology maybe redundant? It's a question that needs to be asked that isn't really being asked or discussed as much as it should be. Then it comes to freight. I just want to draw on a few of these. We obviously heard a little bit about freight this morning. At top left, I just want to raise your point that this is being trialled by the company Hermes at the moment. And the size of it basically fits a crate of beer in. You won't be surprised to hear that it was actually designed by students, which I think is rather good. But it's being taken forward, and it's opened by your cars, by your phone, your smartphone. You unlock it, and it will come to you and deliver it wherever you need it. Also, obviously, the Oxbotica autonomous vehicle is looking at combining both the use of goods, people, and goods in terms of freight. So looking at that, we've obviously heard a lot about UAVs and drones in the last session. But interestingly, I think that there's a big area of growth for platooning of vehicles on our roads, and that's where I think we'll start to see the first lot of autonomous technology. Aviation is something that I want to touch on. It didn't come up in the last session, and that's looking at the way nature works. So if you think of the formation, how geese fly, they fly in the formation of a V. And we found that this actually has reductions of around 15 to 20% in fuel efficiency. Even just the blended wing tips at the end, winglets that we've seen on majority of planes now have a 3 to 5% fuel. So again, it's addressing this efficiency and looking at how we can drive down waste. Finally, wearables is something we haven't discussed on at all today. We've talked a lot about smartphones. Well, why do we need a whole phone? There's a lot of technology out there and growth within the wearable market that looks at how we can develop it and free up our data. Hyperloop. A lot of people are very excited about this, partly from it being Elon Musk's initial project. There's a lot of engineering risks that aren't being discussed about this at the moment. The challenges with the alignment of the track, for one example, the issues of the speed that you're travelling at, the passenger experience at those speeds, what if something goes wrong. All very great little challenge. It's a great little challenge and it's a great student project. Whether it will become a reality is something to be considered. If you think about how expensive some of our HS2 route is, for example, I dread to think how expensive something like Hyperloop would be. The Horizon system is another one that's like a mothership that picks up trains that's been demonstrated or thought about in China. And then finally, we did talk earlier about the virtual reality or augmented reality. Well, actually, if we lose all our green spaces because we need to build so many more houses and the air quality gets so bad outside that we have to wear masks all the time, maybe we won't go outside to exercise, maybe we won't go on holiday, maybe we'll just put on a VR headset and stay in the comfort of our own lounge. So how do we get to the Emerald City? We need to work together, we need to develop an energy policy, a transport policy, and work together. We all need to get involved. To quote Abraham Lincoln, the best way to predict your future is to create it. Thank you.